Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so today we're going to absolutely shatter a really common and honestly super dangerous misconception. A lot of us just kind of assume asbestos is a solved problem, right? Like it's a thing of the past, basically a historical footnote right up there with leaded gasoline. But the reality? It is way more complex and, frankly, significantly more alarming.
So let's dive right in and really challenge what most of us assume. Because the crazy thing is, once you start digging into the data, this lethal material is literally hiding in places you would never expect to find it today. We're not just talking about it being locked away inside the walls of some abandoned, creepy factory. No, it is actively present in our modern world right now.
I mean, think about children's toys or the sparkly makeup palettes sold at Claire's as recently as 2017. Or even the dust we kick up while off-roading or play sand in a child's sandbox. It's wild, but asbestos is shockingly still hanging around in our environment and our consumer goods. And, a lot of times it ends up in these products totally by accident. Just because minerals like talc and vermiculite are often mined right alongside natural asbestos deposits.
2.8 million. Let that sink in for a second. That is the staggering estimated number of global deaths linked to asbestos that we might see by the year 2035. So yeah, this is definitely not some dormant issue. It's an active global health crisis. So, how exactly did we end up here?
Well, to figure that out, we have to look at what people used to call the miracle mineral, and exactly why humanity fell so head over heels in love with asbestos in the first place.
Let's zoom in, way in. At a microscopic level, you have this thing called the silica tetrahedron. It's basically a silicon atom completely surrounded by oxygen atoms, sharing electrons in a way that makes them incredibly, unbelievably stable. And because they're already so tightly bound together, the oxygen in the air around them has nothing left to react with, meaning it quite literally cannot catch fire. These microscopic structures link up to form curly, flexible tubes. Honestly, it's an absolute marvel of geology. It's a rock that you can actually pull apart into fluffy fibers, and then literally weave into fireproof fabric. Sounds amazing, right? And back during the massive urbanization booms of the 19th and 20th centuries, cities were, burning down constantly. So asbestos looked like the ultimate solution. 803,000 tons. That is the massive amount of asbestos consumed in the United States alone at its peak in 1973. It absolutely saved millions of people from horrific urban fires, for sure. But it also inadvertently set a really deadly trap for the generations that followed.
Because it was just so ubiquitous, it infiltrated practically every corner of modern life. We're not just talking about roofs and insulation here. We are talking about hairdryers, brake pads, and get this, famously, the fake snow falling on Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. Marvel Comics even went so far as to create a villain named the Asbestos Lady. But perhaps the most shocking of all, in the 1950s, folks smoking Kent cigarettes were literally inhaling directly through filters made of pure, blue asbestos. No way, right?
But of course, that miracle turned into a microscopic threat.
Here's what happens. When those indestructible microscopic fibers are inhaled, they lodge themselves deep inside your lungs. Our immune system spots the invaders and sends in white blood cells, called macrophages, to go eat them. But you can't digest a microscopic spear, right? So the macrophages try and they fail, leading to a biological process that scientists brilliantly call frustrated phagocytosis. Basically, these frustrated cells freak out and release inflammatory chemicals that end up damaging our own DNA. Over decades, this constant irritation triggers those cells to divide completely out of control, which causes severe lung scarring and incredibly rare fatal cancers like mesothelioma.
Now, you might be wondering, if it's that dangerous, why didn't we stop using it immediately? Well, that brings us to a massive conspiracy of silence, fueled by decades of corporate deception.
Tracking the paper trail over the decades reveals a pretty dark reality. Actually, as early as 1924, doctors were already discovering a disease called asbestosis in factory workers. Then, throughout the 1930s and 40s, major corporations literally funded animal testing, figured out that asbestos caused cancer, and then they secretly edited the reports to hide the truth from everyone. It wasn't until 1964 that Dr. Irving Selikoff finally blew the whistle publicly, proving once and for all that shipyard workers were dying at terrifying rates.
The hard evidence of this massive cover-up eventually came to light decades later in what was basically an industrial Watergate. Back in 1935, an industry executive actually wrote, and I quote, "I think the less said about asbestos, the better off we are." Unbelievable. These documents proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that companies actively conspired to bury the truth.
They prioritized their profits and maintained a very strict, deliberate conspiracy of silence. And this complete lack of moral obligation, it went straight to the very top. When the president of Johns Manville was confronted in the 1940s and flat out asked if he would really just let his employees work until they dropped dead, he reportedly replied, "Yes, we save a lot of money that way." I mean, it's just horrifying to even think about.
So, despite all of that overwhelming evidence finally coming out, fixing the problem wasn't easy. Regulatory failures and massive loopholes actually kept asbestos alive and well in the system.
Take W.R. Grace, for example. This is the company responsible for tragically poisoning the entire town of Libby, Montana, through their vermiculite mining operations. They lobbied regulators incredibly hard, and they actually succeeded in pushing through the 1% Grace rule. Basically, they argued that any product containing less than 1% asbestos shouldn't even be regulated. This completely arbitrary threshold severely weakens detection standards across the board, giving a free pass to massive amounts of contaminated materials. And this loophole directly impacts how we actually test for it. On one hand, you have the PLM method. It's cheap, it's fast, but it really struggles to see ultra-small fibers or anything hovering under that 1% threshold. On the other hand, you have TEM testing. This method magnifies a sample 1,000,000 times, easily spotting the microscopic danger. And this distinction is absolutely critical, because after the World Trade Center collapsed on 9/11, literally pulverizing hundreds of tons of asbestos into the air, the EPA largely relied on that less sensitive, cheaper PLM method. As a result, they falsely declared the air around Ground Zero safe to breathe, which tragically led to thousands of severe, long-term illnesses for first responders and local residents.
Which brings us right to the present day. We have to look at why this remains an ongoing danger right now.
A lot of people don't know this, but the EPA actually tried to enact a total, sweeping ban on asbestos back in 1989. But of course, the industry sued, and the ban was overturned on a legal technicality in 1991. Because of that ruling, our legal system today only regulates very narrow, strictly commercial definitions of asbestos. Basically just 6 specific minerals. Meaning, if a deadly fiber happens to break into what geologists call a cleavage fragment, or if it just doesn't fit the exact narrow commercial definition, it simply isn't counted during safety testing. Even though, let's be real, your lungs definitely do not know the difference.
And then there's the physical environment. Geologists recently discovered massive, naturally occurring asbestos deposits spread out across 1,000,000 acres just outside of Las Vegas. And natural geologic processes actually transport this deadly dust right into super popular recreational areas where people go off-roading. Yet when researchers tried to raise the alarm and warn the public, they faced intense pushback. State officials were heavily suppressing the data, largely because they were terrified of hurting the local economy and tourism.
Now, if we zoom out globally, look at this number, 350,000 tons. While the U.S. is busy fighting over legal definitions and loopholes, that is the staggering amount of asbestos that India imported in the year 2019 alone. This is solid proof that asbestos is not just some old, lingering problem from the past. It is still a booming, highly profitable, and incredibly deadly global industry.
And even our most recent domestic progress here in the States is pretty flawed. Yes, under the 2024 U.S. asbestos ban, chrysotile asbestos is finally banned, although, fair warning, some industries got a very generous 12-year phase-out period. But when you look at what is not banned, there are massive gaps. This new rule doesn't ban the other 5 types of asbestos, it completely ignores naturally occurring environmental deposits, and it does absolutely nothing to address the millions of tons of asbestos that are already hiding inside our schools, our homes, and our existing infrastructure.
So now that you know asbestos isn't just some relic of the past, we want to leave you with this uncomfortable but absolutely vital question to ask yourself. Have you already been exposed without even knowing it? Whether it's tucked away in a vintage toy, floating in the dust from a dirt road, or packed inside the walls of your own home,